What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another Transmission Tuesday. If you're in the Indigo Instinct Healing Matrix on Facebook, it's Tuesday, which means it's time for another round of spiritual education, tips and tricks. And this week, we have a book review. So the book that I want to review is called Waking Up in 5D, and it's by Maureen St. Germain. And I recommend this book to every long-term client that I work with. We actually dive into the first chapter and some of the intro topics when you work with me in the Ascension Code, which is the private 3-month program that I run. I talk about this book to anyone who will listen who is experiencing ascension symptoms. So being able to feel things they couldn't feel before, or maybe getting a ringing in their ears that they've never had before, or they're getting into tarot, or they're getting into dream work, or they're getting into crystals, and they're getting into this realm of spirit, no matter what your entry point is, because in reality, the globe and the planet and Gaia is ascending, and we are evolving into a new age. And, we hear people talk about the Piscean age, the age of Pisces, and the Aquarian age, the age of Aquarius, and these sort of phases that the world goes through. And another way to look at that is to understand that the world is entering this ascension process to eventually get to a point of 5D. Now, if you are curious or don't know what the heck I'm talking about when I say 5D, there is a video on the topic between the differences of 3D, 4D, and 5D right here. And, or maybe it's here, the way that it's mirrored. And I just want to dive into this book a little bit. So, the first question is, or the first thing I want to talk about is the layout. We have a bunch of chapters, and this book is, it is best to read front to back if you are new to Ascension. So if you are new to understanding energy work, or you are new to the realm of spirit, then it's definitely important to read it front to back, because Maureen St. Germain explains things in a really cohesive manner. And it's really good to read this book in chunks. Any sort of nonfiction book that has to do with spirit, and really any sort of nonfiction book in general, I usually recommend that you don't read it like a novel. Like, don't just sit down and expect to just absorb it the way that you would a story, unless it's a memoir. But when it's self-help and it's got information and it's stuff that you need to integrate, it's really good to read a book like this along with a different book. Or if you're not a huge reader, to just read it in little sections and then continue on to the next section when you feel ready. So this book is split up in pretty strong boundary chapters, and if you aren't new to Ascension and you aren't new to the realm of spirit, maybe you work in energy healing, or maybe you're just doing self-practice, you can kind of read this book all over the place, and that can be really helpful if you want to use it for reference. So if you're curious about, let's see what the first thing comes to mind. So the fifth dimensional balancing of male and female. This is inside the chapter Finding Your Fifth Dimensional Way, and it is alongside a couple of other things in this chapter that talks about past lives and how to recognize past lives and other things like that. And if you already know what a past life is and you're already sort of in this world, then flipping through this chapter or this book by chapters out of order, I feel is totally fine and can work really well as a reference book for you. Now, the one thing I will mention about this book is that if you are just getting into the realm of spirit and sort of waking up or becoming connected to your higher self or the energy work or the energetics of the planet, some of these concepts can seem a little bit far out. And it's important to understand that sometimes when you read texts about spirituality and about certain truths that are happening on the planet, you don't have to agree with them, and you don't have to take all of them as hard fact, which I find if you're new to this book and you're new to some of the writings of Maureen St. Germain, then you might feel like this book is a little bit out there, and you might get really into the opening chapter, which talks about who your higher self is and how to connect to that. But then you might get to, the middle of the book where she talks about how past lives work very specifically and how the naming of past lives work very specifically, i.e., maybe you were Amanda in one life and then you're Adam in a next and then you're Andrew in a next, and talks about that link. And that might seem a little bit far out for you, but it's good to go in with your head up when you pick this book up, because I do believe that the knowledge is super invaluable. And I also feel like there is a really strong thread of synchronicity attached to this book, because there are a couple of things that I read in it that I didn't really resonate with at the time. And then 2 weeks later, something happened to me that proved what was happening in the book. So let me give you an example. I mean, in the last chapter, Maureen St. Germain talks about connecting to your dragons and other guides, but more specifically connecting to dragons as a type of spiritual guide for you. And when I first read this, I mean, I've always loved dragons, and I always have loved fantasy fiction, because I do believe that those types of creatures had to have existed at some point in order for so many people to tell stories about them. But when I first read it, I found that the concept of dragons was a little bit out there and a little bit, like, okay, like I know I have guides and I hear them, and this was years ago. And I think that the idea of dragons is cool, but I can't really imagine a dragon being one of my spiritual guides. So I did some of the practices that she recommends, and the one thing I love about this book is that it is full of exercises. It's full of meditations. She actually sends some links in the text writes some links in the text about how you can click or go to this link and listen to this meditation. So she's packed it full of actual useful usable information, which I really love. But I did the practice on connecting to your dragons, and I think it was, maybe 6 or 7 days later, and I had this overwhelming experience where I was out in the ocean and I had this crazy feeling of sort of shivers all over me. It felt like my nerves were on the outside of my body. I felt like the sky was peeling itself back and I was going to see the world inside out. And then I saw this cloud pass in front of me, and it was in this undeniable shape of a dragon. And when I looked at that cloud, I heard this voice behind me that said, "We are here. We are present for you." And when I heard that voice in my bones, I watched the cloud. There was another cloud over top of it, and it became 2 dragons. And it was the most sort of undeniably perfectly shaped, dragon-shaped clouds I have ever seen in my life. I actually went home and redrew the clouds in my journal because I wanted to be able to remember it. And so that experience really changed my reality. And my point with this book is that you might read a couple of things in it and not really resonate with it or think it's a little bit far out there, but all I ask, if you are going to pick up this book, because I do highly recommend it, is to go in with an open mind, and if anything, just to temporarily suspend your disbelief. So you don't necessarily have to agree with everything in the book, and you don't necessarily have to believe everything in the book, but if you can go in and temporarily suspend your disbelief, you might be shocked at how much you learn from this text. So that is my short little book review of Maureen St. Germain's Waking Up in 5D. If you're curious about the other books that I read, head on over to my website, indigoinstincthealing.com, and click on my Read These tab at the top of my website. And I have a list of all of the books that I consider my ride or die books. You know, these are the books that I always have. I often travel with a lot of them. I keep them close to me. And if you are somebody who finds that they learn best through absorbing information, then check out the other books on my page and see for yourself and sort of give them a try and see if you might find some answers that you're looking for through these books. I will leave a link to Maureen St. Germain's website, and for those of you who are in the Matrix in Facebook, she's actually part of this group, so I am hoping that we might be able to do an interview with her sometime soon, but I am super grateful that this book exists. Go check it out. It's in paperback. It's affordable. You can probably get it from your library. If you're in COVID land with really intense library restrictions, you can probably get it just to be picked up, and give it a shot, because you never know what you might unlock within yourself from giving it a read. That's all I have for you today, and thank you so much for tuning in and for listening, and if you're part of the Matrix, for being part of the family on Facebook, and if you're here on YouTube, for being part of that community as well, which is growing. Thank you so much. I so appreciate it. Leave your comments below and let me know what you think. Much love.